so Smartling is a translation management platform, and we're totally agnostic as to what kind of translators you use, your own crowd, professional translators, our professional translators. And so what we just wanted to talk to you today about is how the rise in internet usage globally and how mobile is really what's powering this increased usage of internet connectivity globally is driving that, and why and how you need to think about localization and globalization, because it really is an important part of your strategy. So mobile is where the internet sort of growth is happening, from maybe about 1% of all the sort of activity in 2009 to 10% in 2012. And that's even though at that point, smartphones, which is what was really driving this growth, represented only about 14% of all the phones. And again, these are global numbers that we're looking at here. Next slide. So who is actually driving this growth? It's really the middle class. So they're the ones who can afford these devices, who can afford these services, and afford these plans. Globally right now, we're looking at about 2 billion people in the middle class. And according to some research, we expect this to grow by 2030 to be about 4.9 billion people. Okay? And what's interesting is that in the United States and in Europe, it's actually going to shrink. So when you look at the total global middle class population, Europe and the United States is going to go from representing about 50% of that down to 22%. So the growth is really happening where we call now emerging markets. Okay, give me the next slide. And Asia specifically is where this is happening. And so I hope you guys are seeing sort of a recurring theme here with what the other folks said earlier about where the downloads are happening, where the revenue is happening, where the usage is growing, where the adoption is happening. So when you look at China, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, these different countries, right now they represent about 30% of the total global middle class population, but by 2030, it's going to more than double. Okay, it's going to be about 64% of the total. And what's interesting is when you look at the consumption, the money being spent, that's going to be about 40% of the total pie. So Asia is really where this growth is happening. 2030 maybe sounds like it's a little bit too far out for some of you folks. So let's look at 2020, which is less than 10 years away. And according to Eric Schmidt, who I think knows a little bit about internet usage and growth, he's predicting that the entire global population will be online by 2020. And again, where this is really happening, what he didn't say is where this is really happening is on mobile devices. Okay. Can you go to the next slide? So we've established that this growth is happening. People are getting more online, and they're doing it with these mobile devices, and it's happening outside of the U.S., at least where the large growth is happening. What that sort of implies is these people don't necessarily speak English or Spanish or French or the languages that you may be a little bit more familiar with. Okay, so they speak other languages, and that's where you really need to sort of be ready for them. But there's actually some research that shows that you really need to be in those languages. You can't just make assumptions that, okay, I could just do English or Spanish and that's going to be enough. You can go to the next slide. So Distimo did pretty interesting research. They did a study. And this study included about 200 apps, so I think it's pretty legitimate. And what they looked at is what happens when an app releases a localized version, translated version, both in terms of downloads and in terms of revenue. And what they found was that within 1 week of releasing a localized version of an application, downloads are going to increase by over 120%. Okay, and revenues are going to increase 26% per language. Okay, so you can just keep stacking those languages on top of each other, and you can get this incremental revenue growth for your applications. Okay, so I think we established here that you really need to be thinking about localization as part of your overall global strategy, distribution in those countries, but also being in their languages. Okay, let me just do a little quiz here. How many countries are there in the world? Anyone want to take a guess?
170.
Close. But and some people, it's a little bit divergent, but it's something in like the 190 region. There's 190 plus members of the United Nations. And the app stores, the major app stores today, are already representing 100 countries. So the app stores are already sort of more or less there for you, and you can see where they're going to also grow as the consumers grow into those markets. Just like someone said earlier, wherever they go, we're going to be there too. So wherever the consumers become online, the app stores are going to be there too. But again, if you think back against that research that this demo did, you really need to be in their languages if you want to be successful there. Okay. So let me do another pop quiz here. How many of you have been involved in a product that was distributed in at least 4 languages? Okay, good. I figured most of you would. How about 8? Good, yeah. So you guys know this, right? I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. And so I think you guys know that doing the localization is really important. It's the only way to really enter those markets and be strong there. What kind of problems did you guys have in managing the localization process? Anyone want to chime in with it?
Yeah. So like typical navigational stuff that in English, and then when you translate it, it doesn't fit inside the button.
Right.
And so,
really common problem.
Or trying to find out what is local, what do they use for back, forward, etc.
Yeah. Strings grow in length, and without context, people don't know that it's not.
Because then your UX, then it affects your UI design, and then you have these weird languages that go right to left, and then like, well, okay, too complicated, so it's tough titty for the guys who right to left.
There's not that many right to left, but Arabic is a really significant one. And again, just look up, read the news today. Where are things happening? Where are people embracing online activities? It's in Arabic-speaking world. So great. So what we're doing at Smartling is trying to remove some of the hassles and the pains around getting your content translated. And so we've created an online platform where you can push all your content in, okay, manage it in one place on the cloud, give the translators everything they need so they get the context, whether that's scraping the web page so they see where the text fits on the button, or uploading images so that they can see what your app screen looks like so they have an idea of how much room they have to play with, providing instructions. But it's also technology, so making sure that if you have variables in your strings, that they can't muck it up and somehow break your application code. And we're also building a translation memory for your product so that you can get faster and higher quality translations. So if you make just a small change to a string, they're going to see that. They can just make that really quick change. If you have 2 pieces of content that are just kind of similar, they can see that. They can also make sure that their translations are going to be consistent and sort of in line with the tone of your product and so forth. Okay, next slide. So I just want to quickly run through a couple examples of some of the clients who are using Smartling, just to give you guys a sense of how these people who we think are sort of leaders out there, I think are well-recognized name brands, have embraced this, and they're using Smartling to, again, go faster, produce it at higher quality, have fewer problems. And it's something that we call agile localization, okay? So people are just doing things a lot quicker now. They're releasing smaller things with web distribution. You don't have to wait for that big, 0.5 release anymore. You can update it really quickly and constantly. And we're trying to build a translation platform that recognizes that and moves at your speed, okay? So Foursquare, I think you're all pretty familiar with, and is actually one of our neighbors in New York City. One of the innovators in the mobile app space. What's really interesting for them is the language. So things like check-in, like for us American English speakers, it just makes sense. Like when you first heard check-in, it probably just intuitively made sense to you. But as you move to different regions or different countries, you really have to think about not only how do you translate that so that it just works, but it's kind of part of the Foursquare brand as well, this idea of checking in. And even though other players have sort of, Yelp and Facebook, they're all doing their sort of check-in or I'm here kind of functionality, I think most people think of Foursquare as being a check-in, and they need to make sure that that part of their brand made it through the app localization. So you can see here Spanish and Russian. Move to the next slide. Double Twist, which I think some of you in the room will appreciate as well, they recognize that not everybody has a single device platform in their possession. Not everybody is completely Apple or completely Android. Most people have devices that run on multiple platforms and multiple systems, and they're trying to help you manage your personal content in a way that will work seamlessly across that entire ecosystem. And they came to Smartling to help with their app localization as well. Okay, next slide. Paper by 53, I think, is an interesting one because I don't know if you guys know this. It's basically a sketchbook for iPad and tablet. And at first blush, you might go, what do you even need to translate or localize in that thing? It's blank pages, right? But they do have content. They have instructions, they have tips, and they have different things like this. But they had an interesting problem which a lot of people face, which is as soon as you put out an app that gets that sort of skyrocket, sort of popularity, clones will start popping up in other regions. So if you release it in the United States and they see that all of a sudden this thing rocketed to #1, you'll get these clones popping up elsewhere. So they knew they had to go really super quickly and get their content localized so that they could get Paper, which is their app, which is the one that sort of was creating all this buzz out there in these different countries, and they turned to Smartling so that they could do it really super quickly, and we were able to turn around for them like incredibly fast.
How fast?
Talking about just a couple of weeks here for several languages. And again, they just send us their files. We already know the iOS format. We know how to parse it. We know how to represent it correctly. The translators actually saw screenshots of where the text was showing up, so they could do it really quickly without too much back and forth. So when they got it back, there was not so much of, oh, it broke, it doesn't fit, and whatnot. Next slide. Uber, really popular in the Bay Area. I think when this first came out, a lot of my New York friends said, why the hell do you need to call a cab? Like, you just go out to the street and yell at them. I said, you never lived in San Francisco. I used to have the phone numbers of 4 different cabbies in my phone so that I could try to get a ride when I needed one late nights. And it was always like, I'm sorry, I'm on the other side of town, I can't come over. So Uber, bless them, I'm one of those ones that I'm jealous of. Why didn't I think of that? So they nailed it, right? But also, because they were very disruptive, they had some issues with, New York taxi and limo companies. But the fact is that taxis and black cars are everywhere, and same kind of issue. If they didn't move quickly, you're gonna have these people sort of following them and chasing them. So they've got their app localized by us. And they also represent, a couple of these companies represent interesting kind of client because it's not just the app. The apps are almost shells. There's a lot of content that's coming in through web services. Even the content that's visible on the screen is actually getting fed in through, some kind of a service call that returns a JSON thing that has the actual text that they're putting up there. Because if you're not online, the app is almost useless, right? And so they're able to do both their apps and their, so as a user, you can log in to their website and manage your account, and as a driver, you can do the same. So they did all their apps and their websites with us. Next slide. And finally, my favorite one, the last one I'm going to talk about is Spotify. Similarly, doing something really disruptive. Very different story here because it wasn't an issue of sort of clones following. You probably all know the music industry is super difficult to work in. You can't just go out there and start streaming everybody's music. There's a lot of licensing involved. And they were doing something definitely new in terms of the model of really meeting the demand of what people were saying they wanted. They were basically saying, I just want to listen to what I want to listen, where I want to listen to it, and I really don't want to pay for it. I kind of want radio, but in terms of it's free, but I kind of want to just be able to call in the DJ and listen to what I want. So they figured out a model that worked for it. And they represent a kind of client that's good for us, which was that they were on another platform and it was breaking down and it wasn't working as fast as they needed and they weren't getting high quality translations. And so they made the choice to migrate all their content to Smartling. And you can see here their app in Chinese. You could just run through the next couple slides. That's their website in Spanish, and that's their desktop app in Spanish. So I think a lot of the app developers here can appreciate that it's not always just everything on board the app. That's maybe true with games, and as we saw earlier from the Distimo research, I think they highlighted specifically Angry Birds as one of the 200 apps that they studied, but you really get tremendous value from localizing.